When you hear the smooth opening of Just Once or the unforgettable Passion in Secret Garden, one voice cuts through with honesty and soul: James Ingram. He was the singer who could break your heart with a whisper and lift you higher with a single note. Yet, for all his Grammy wins, platinum hits, and timeless duets, his name rarely sits beside Lionel Richie or Luther Vandross. Why did an artist who shaped the soundtrack of love and longing remain so often overlooked? Why was the man behind classics like Baby Come to Me and 100 Ways not celebrated as loudly as the legends he stood next to? His journey is filled with brilliance, heartbreak, and resilience. Let's dive into his story right now. James Edward Ingram was born on the 16th of February, 1952, in Akron, Ohio, a city better known for rubber factories and blue-collar grit than for producing world-class singers. Yet from the beginning, the soundscape of his childhood was more than the hum of machinery. It was the rhythm of gospel choirs, the shouts of preachers on Sunday mornings, and the harmonies floating out of neighborhood porches. That was the Akron James grew up in: hardworking, deeply spiritual, and quietly musical. His parents weren't entertainers, but they valued faith, family, and discipline. Music came naturally in the Ingram household. James's older brother, Philip Ingram, would later find fame as a member of the R&B group Switch, proving that the family tree carried strong musical roots. James himself was drawn to instruments early. He taught himself piano by ear, fascinated by the way chords could make emotions swell. In church, he quickly became the boy people whispered about. "That kid can really sing." The church experience was crucial. It gave James structure and confidence, but more importantly, it taught him how to channel spirit into sound. Gospel wasn't just about hitting notes, it was about moving hearts. That lesson never left him. Whether singing in the choir or practicing late at night on a beat-up keyboard, James was unknowingly shaping the voice that would one day touch millions. Growing up in Akron during the 1950 and 1960 meant dealing with both opportunity and limitation. The civil rights movement was shifting the nation's consciousness, and young black men often carried both the burden of discrimination and the hope of change. For James, music became a refuge. He wasn't chasing fame yet, he was chasing expression, the chance to be heard in a world that didn't always listen. By his teenage years, James was already performing with local bands around Ohio. Friends recall him as quiet off stage but magnetic under the spotlight. He could sit at a piano and turn an ordinary gathering into something holy. One moment he'd belt out a church hymn, the next he'd slide seamlessly into a soul tune from Ray Charles or Sam Cooke. The ability to shift between sacred and secular was a gift, and Akron audiences noticed. School teachers and peers encouraged him, but James's path wasn't guaranteed. The music industry was miles away in New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, and Akron was still a small town in comparison. Yet James carried a stubborn belief in his own talent. He knew his voice was different. It wasn't the loudest, but it had texture, a husky warmth that wrapped around a listener and refused to let go. The late 1960 brought another turning point: the explosion of funk and R&B across Ohio. Bands like the Ohio Players and Zapp were breaking through nationally. For a young James Ingram, it meant proof that someone from his state could make it big. He began writing songs, experimenting with melodies that blended gospel roots with modern soul. Local gigs gave him practice, but also frustration. There were nights when the pay was barely enough for gas money, and the dream of reaching a larger stage seemed distant. Still, those years built resilience. James learned humility by hauling equipment into clubs, learned patience by singing to half-empty rooms, and learned discipline by rehearsing long after others had gone home. More importantly, he learned that his gift wasn't just about personal glory. People responded emotionally to his singing. Strangers would tell him, "Man, you made me feel something tonight." That confirmation mattered more than applause. Ingram's early life was not glamorous, but it was formative. The boy from Akron absorbed gospel fervor, family values, and a deep sense of perseverance. He saw how music could elevate everyday struggle, and he realized that even if the world ignored him, he had something undeniable inside. It was only a matter of time before someone beyond Ohio noticed. Mini-hook. How did this church-trained voice, forged in the neighborhoods of Akron, end up catching the ear of one of the most powerful producers in the world? The answer lies in the next chapter of his journey. By the late 1970s, James Ingram had sharpened his skills in countless small clubs across Ohio. But local fame wasn't enough. He wanted to test himself in bigger arenas. That chance came when he moved west to Los Angeles, chasing the dream that had fueled so many before him. The city was buzzing with funk, disco, and R&B, and James found himself right in the middle of it. At first, survival meant taking any gig he could get. He played keyboards for local acts, backed other singers, and hustled just to pay rent. Some nights he was part of the band Revelation Funk, grinding through sets for small but loyal audiences. Those years didn't bring instant recognition, but they honed his craft. He learned how to be adaptable, switching from soulful ballads to upbeat funk, and he built a reputation as a dependable, versatile musician. Opportunity often arrives quietly, and for James it came through a demo tape. He recorded rough vocals for a songwriter friend who couldn't hit the notes himself. That tape somehow found its way to the legendary Quincy Jones. Quincy, who had an ear for hidden gems, couldn't ignore the texture of James's voice. It wasn't polished, but it was raw, emotional, and deeply human. He wanted to hear more. This connection changed everything. Quincy Jones was assembling a new album, The Dude, in 1981. The project would feature powerhouse names, but he also wanted fresh talent. He took a chance on James, handing him 2 songs, Just Once and 100 Ways. For a young artist who had never fronted a major studio recording, it was like being thrown into the deep end. But James swam beautifully. When Just Once was released, listeners were stunned. His voice carried vulnerability, a man pleading, confessing mistakes in love, yet still clinging to hope. It wasn't the typical bravado of R&B at the time. It was intimacy, almost like reading a personal diary. Radio DJs fell in love with it, and the song climbed the charts. Suddenly, James Ingram's name was on everybody's lips. Then came 100 Ways, where Just Once was confessional. 100 Ways was romantic poetry set to music. It spoke to men about how to cherish a woman and to women about what they deserved. Delivered in James's smooth yet textured style, the song resonated across demographics. It didn't just make him popular, it made him respected. The track won him a Grammy for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance, a remarkable feat for someone virtually unknown the year before. In that moment, James Ingram was no longer just a background player or session musician. He was a solo voice the industry had to pay attention to. Quincy Jones had discovered gold, and audiences around the world were beginning to understand that a new balladeer had arrived. Mini-hook. But if this breakthrough was impressive, what came next would prove that James Ingram was more than just a one-hit wonder. The world was about to see his voice soar even higher. The success of Just Once and 100 Ways gave James Ingram instant credibility, but it was only the beginning. Rather than fading after one lucky break, he proved that his voice could stand shoulder to shoulder with the greats. Audiences weren't just hearing a new singer, they were hearing an interpreter of emotion, someone who could transform ordinary lyrics into confessions of the soul. As the early 1980 unfolded, James's reputation grew quickly. He was in demand not only as a vocalist, but also as a collaborator. His voice had a richness that blended effortlessly with others, a quality that made him a favorite for duets. Producers and songwriters realized that if you paired James with the right partner, sparks would fly. One of the first to notice this chemistry was Patty Austin. Together, James and Patty recorded Baby Come to Me, a track that would become one of the most beloved duets of its era. The song had been released once without much fanfare, but after it was featured on the hit soap opera General Hospital, it was reissued and shot to #1. Suddenly, James and Patty were household names. Their blend of voices, her crystalline clarity with his husky warmth, created something unforgettable. To this day, fans call it one of the greatest duets ever recorded. James also began writing and co-writing, flexing his skills beyond the microphone. Few knew it then, but he was behind some iconic hits, including contributing to Michael Jackson's PYT. Pretty Young Thing. His pen was as powerful as his voice, and this behind-the-scenes work further cemented his place in the industry. Meanwhile, his live performances gained attention. Though James wasn't a flashy showman, his concerts had a different kind of magic. He stood center stage, sometimes with nothing more than a piano, and let the music carry the room. Reviewers often remarked that he could hold an audience spellbound with just a whisper or a soaring high note. He didn't need gimmicks, authenticity was his calling card. By the mid-1980s, James Ingram was firmly established as more than Quincy Jones's discovery. He was carving his own identity, a balladeer with depth, a songwriter with range, and a collaborator who elevated everyone around him. Each new project added another layer to his reputation, and fans began to realize that his artistry wasn't a trend, it was timeless. Mini-hook. The stage was set. James had the hits, the awards, and the respect of his peers. But the real explosion, the moment that would define his career and secure his place in music history, was still on the horizon. By the mid-1980s, James Ingram was no longer just an emerging talent, he was a proven voice of his generation. The turning point came when his collaborations began to resonate far beyond the R&B charts, cutting across pop, adult, contemporary, and even film soundtracks. He had entered the rare space where his voice wasn't just popular, it was iconic. The duet Baby Come to Me with Patti Austin became a cultural phenomenon. Originally released in 1981, the track had moderate success until fate intervened. When the song was featured on the popular soap opera General Hospital, audiences demanded to hear it again. The re-release in 1982 sent it skyrocketing to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Suddenly, James and Patti were everywhere on television, radio, and in living rooms across America. It wasn't just a hit single, it was a love anthem. For couples of that era, Baby Come to Me became the soundtrack to weddings, first dances, and quiet evenings. The chemistry between James and Patti was undeniable, and their partnership would become one of the most celebrated vocal pairings of the decade. But James wasn't done. In 1982, he and Patti reunited for another ballad, How Do You Keep the Music Playing? Written by the legendary songwriting duo Alan and Marilyn Bergman with Michel Legrand, the song was featured in the film Best Friends. Once again, James delivered a performance that was both tender and powerful. The track earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song and cemented James's status as not just a chart artist but a voice for cinema. Few singers could balance technical control with raw emotion the way he could. Then, in 1985, James Ingram became part of one of the most historic moments in music history, We Are the World. Written by Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie, and produced by Quincy Jones, the charity single united dozens of the world's greatest singers to raise money for famine relief in Africa. With legends like Stevie Wonder, Diana Ross, Ray Charles, and Bruce Springsteen all taking turns, James held his own with ease. At around the 6:11 mark, his solo line soared a husky plea that stood out even in a sea of powerhouse voices. Many fans to this day single out his moment as one of the song's most memorable highlights. These performances represented more than chart success. They represented cultural impact. James Ingram's voice was now tied to milestones, a #1 duet that defined romance, a movie ballad nominated for an Oscar, and a global charity single that became an anthem of unity. Not bad for a kid from Akron who once played small gigs just to cover rent. The mid-1980s proved that James wasn't just a singer, he was a storyteller. He sang about love, hope, and connection with a sincerity that crossed boundaries of race, age, and genre. And yet, even at this peak, there was a lingering sense of injustice. For all his accomplishments, his name was still too often left out of the conversation when people discussed the great male vocalists of his era. Mini-hook. But James wasn't finished surprising the world. The next chapter of his career would give us one of the most sensual and unforgettable songs of the decade and prove once again how underrated he truly was. If Baby Come to Me and We Are the World proved James Ingram's ability to move hearts, then The Secret Garden confirmed his place as a master of sensual storytelling. Released in 1989 on Quincy Jones's star-studded album Back on the Block, the track brought together 4 powerhouse voices: Barry White, Al B., Shure, El DeBarge, and James Ingram. Each man had a distinctive role, but when James's part arrived, the temperature shifted. His husky tone didn't just sing the lyrics, it caressed them. Fans often say his section took the song home, and decades later, people still point to his delivery as the emotional peak of the record. The late 1980s were also marked by another defining collaboration. Teaming up with Michael McDonald, James recorded Ya Mo Be There, a gospel-infused anthem of hope and unity. Released in 1983, it had already earned him a Grammy for Best R&B Performance by a Duo or Group, but its legacy carried well into the later part of the decade. The song demonstrated James's ability to blend soul with pop accessibility, cementing his reputation as an artist who could inspire across boundaries. To this day, the track remains a playlist favorite, proof of his versatility and timeless appeal. Awards and recognition followed. By the end of the decade, James had collected 2 Grammy Awards and multiple nominations. He was now a fixture on the charts, a trusted collaborator for icons, and a respected songwriter. Yet, despite all this, his name still didn't rise as quickly in conversations about the era's biggest male singers. Lionel Richie was topping pop charts. Luther Vandross was celebrated as the king of love ballads, and Michael Jackson was redefining pop superstardom. James Ingram, meanwhile, continued to deliver classics but with less fanfare. This disconnect is part of what makes his story bittersweet. He had the hits, the voice, and the credibility, but he didn't chase fame with the same aggressiveness as some of his peers. James was never a tabloid magnate, never one for scandal or flashy headlines. He kept his personal life grounded, focusing on his wife and children rather than the constant glare of the spotlight. While that choice may have limited his visibility, it gave his career a sense of dignity and authenticity that fans deeply respect. Still, the fact remains. James Ingram was one of the defining voices of the 1980, yet he often stood in the shadows of others. When you listen to The Secret Garden or Ya Mo Be There, you realize this wasn't a man trying to compete, it was a man contributing something unique. His voice was like velvet, wrapped in grit, equal parts tenderness and strength. By the close of the decade, James had achieved what most singers could only dream of: Grammy wins, #1 hits, and legendary collaborations. But the industry spotlight didn't always reflect the magnitude of his contributions. That paradox success without full recognition is exactly what makes James Ingram the definition of celebrity underrated. Mini-hook. As the 1990 approached, James would continue to create unforgettable music, but behind the applause, challenges, and struggles were waiting. What happens when the industry begins to overlook a giant? Success can be a double-edged sword. For James Ingram, the 1980 had been a golden period filled with chart-topping singles, Grammy Awards, and unforgettable collaborations. Yet as the 1990 arrived, the music industry began shifting in ways that didn't always favor artists like him. R&B was evolving, hip-hop was rising fast, and the industry's attention tilted toward younger, flashier acts. James still had the voice, but the spotlight that once seemed steady began to move elsewhere. Part of the challenge was his personality. James Ingram wasn't a scandal-driven artist. He didn't chase controversy, and he rarely made headlines outside of his music. In an era when tabloids and MTV craved spectacle, James remained private and grounded. He focused on his marriage, a union that lasted over 4 decades, and his children, choosing family life over non-stop touring or publicity stunts. To fans, this was admirable. To industry executives and promoters, it sometimes meant less visibility, fewer magazine covers, and a perception that he wasn't hungry enough for stardom. Another layer of conflict was the way the industry often undervalued artists who thrived on subtlety. James's gift was his ability to convey emotion with restraint. He didn't belt every note to prove his power, and he didn't rely on gimmicks. But in a marketplace increasingly crowded with louder and more theatrical performers, his nuanced approach risked being overlooked. Many critics and fans later argued that this understated artistry, the very thing that made him timeless, ironically contributed to him being underrated. He also faced frustrations with how the business side of music treated him. Despite writing and contributing to hits like Michael Jackson's PYT, his role as a songwriter was not widely publicized. Credit in the industry can be a tricky thing, and James wasn't the type to shout about his achievements. This humility, while noble, sometimes meant that the general public had no idea how influential he truly was behind the scenes. The 1990 did bring moments of success. His ballad, I Don't Have the Heart, reached #1 in 1990, proving he still had the ability to command charts. Yet even then, the recognition seemed fleeting. Younger stars quickly crowded the airwaves, and James's contributions risked being overshadowed by the next wave of R&B and pop acts. For a man who had once stood at the center of Quincy Jones's universe, the slow fade of attention must have been bittersweet. Mini hook. But the greatest challenges James Ingram would face weren't just about fading fame or industry politics. Life had prepared even more personal and heartbreaking battles that would test his strength in ways the stage never could. As the years went on, James Ingram's biggest battles weren't with other singers or the charts, they were with his own health. Behind the velvet voice that had brought joy to millions, James faced a fight few fans knew about. In the late 2000s and early 2010, he began to struggle with health issues that quietly pulled him away from the spotlight. The man who once stood center stage, commanding attention with every note, was now retreating into the privacy of family life, fighting an invisible enemy. That enemy was brain cancer. It's a cruel disease, one that strips away vitality and tests the spirit. James, known for his humility and quiet strength, didn't make his illness a public spectacle. There were no constant tabloid updates, no dramatic press conferences. He chose dignity and discretion, leaning on his wife, Debbie, and their children for support. Fans only learned the full truth much later, when news broke that his condition had worsened. When James Ingram passed away on the 29th of January 2019, at the age of 66, the music world was stunned. For many, it felt sudden because he had always carried himself with such grace and positivity. Tributes poured in from peers, collaborators, and fans across the globe. Quincy Jones described him as one of the most gifted vocalists he had ever worked with. Patty Austin expressed heartbreak, remembering not just a duet partner but a brother in music. Even younger artists, who had grown up listening to his timeless hits, acknowledged his influence. Yet there was also an undercurrent of sadness not only for the loss of a remarkable artist, but for the sense that James Ingram had never truly received the recognition he deserved while alive. Fans wrote messages online about how his part in Secret Garden gave them chills, or how I Don't Have the Heart carried them through heartbreak. Many admitted they hadn't realized he wrote PYT until after his death. In a way, his passing highlighted just how underrated he had been all along. The grief was personal, too. James wasn't just a singer, he was a husband of 44 years, a father, and a grandfather. His devotion to family was one of his defining qualities. Even at the height of his fame, he often turned down long tours to remain close to home. For those who knew him, his legacy was as much about kindness and integrity as it was about music. The final conflict of his life, the battle with cancer, was fought quietly, without the fanfare of the stage. And when the curtain fell, James Ingram left the world with the same dignity he had lived by. Humble, graceful, and true to his values. Mini hook. But while his life ended too soon, his story didn't stop there. The songs, the influence, and the love he gave to music live on, forming a legacy that continues to grow long after his final note. When the news of James Ingram's passing spread in early 2019, it wasn't just headlines, it was memories flooding back for millions of fans. People didn't simply recall that he had hits. They remembered exactly where they were when they first heard Just Once. The weddings where Baby Come to Me played, the late-night drives, soundtracked by 100 Ways, or the chills they felt during his solo in We Are the World. That's the true measure of legacy. Music that doesn't just chart, but attaches itself to life's most intimate moments. James's catalog is a treasure chest of timeless songs. Just Once became an anthem for anyone who has ever loved imperfectly but desperately hoped to make it right. 100 Ways taught men how to treat women with care and tenderness. Baby Come to Me turned into a cultural shorthand for romance, while How Do You Keep the Music Playing became a poignant meditation on love's endurance. I Don't Have the Heart, his #1 ballad from 1990, gave a voice to painful honesty in relationships. Each track wasn't just a song, it was a story, delivered through that warm, husky tone that only James possessed. Even decades later, these songs continue to find new audiences. Streaming platforms introduced James to younger generations, while YouTube is filled with comments from fans testifying to how his music shaped their lives. Some admit they discovered him through their parents' record collections, others through modern playlists, and many through viral clips of The Secret Garden or live performances. His art proved immune to time, transcending generations and genres. Another aspect of his legacy lies in the artists he influenced. Singers who came after him, from neo-soul vocalists to R&B balladeers, borrowed elements of his delivery: the delicate falsetto, the conversational phrasing, the ability to sound intimate even on a grand stage. He showed that power didn't always mean volume. Sometimes it meant vulnerability. That lesson rippled through the decades, inspiring countless performers who wanted to touch hearts rather than just impress ears. Fans also carried his legacy forward in deeply personal ways. Online tributes often sound more like love letters than casual comments. One admirer wrote that his voice in Secret Garden still gives me goosebumps no matter how many times I play it. Another shared that Baby Come to Me was the song she danced to at her wedding in the 1980, and she still tears up every anniversary when it plays. Many highlighted how his humility and dedication to family made them respect him even more. These stories prove that his influence extended beyond music; it shaped lives. What makes James Ingram's legacy particularly powerful is how it thrived even without the constant spotlight. Unlike many of his peers, he didn't dominate tabloid culture or flood the airwaves with self-promotion. Instead, his work spoke for itself, quietly embedding itself into the soundtrack of daily life. That's why, years after his last chart hit, his songs remain staples at weddings, radio shows, and playlists celebrating love and reflection. Mini hook. And yet, for all this undeniable impact, the industry often failed to place James Ingram alongside its most celebrated giants. Was it humility that kept him underrated, or was it an industry blind to subtle brilliance? To fully grasp James Ingram's legacy, you have to compare him with the giants of his era. Marvin Gaye was hailed as the Prince of Motown, Luther Vandross as the King of Romantic Ballads, Lionel Richie as the crossover superstar. These names are etched permanently in the narrative of American music. Yet when you listen closely, James Ingram's artistry holds its own right alongside them. His voice was as instantly recognizable as Luther's, as emotionally rich as Marvin's, and as versatile as Lionel's. The only difference is that history has not spoken his name as loudly. This gap in recognition has often fueled the conversation among fans and critics. Why wasn't James celebrated at the same level? Part of the answer lies in his humility. Unlike some of his peers, James didn't crave the spotlight or the drama that came with it. He wasn't chasing headlines or staging spectacles. He focused on the craft, not the circus. While that may have cost him commercial visibility, it gave his work an authenticity that endures. Beyond his voice, James left an incredible mark as a songwriter. One of his most surprising contributions was co-writing P.Y.T., Pretty Young Thing, for Michael Jackson's Thriller album. Thriller remains the best-selling album of all time, and P.Y.T. is one of its most beloved tracks. The fact that James had a hand in shaping that history is often overlooked. He wasn't just singing love songs, he was helping define pop culture on the biggest stage imaginable. Other artists frequently cite him as an influence. Singers from Babyface to later R&B stylists have praised the intimacy and sincerity James brought to every performance. His phrasing, conversational yet profound, became a template for how to sing ballads with both power and restraint. For vocal coaches and aspiring artists, studying James Ingram is still a masterclass in control, tone, and emotion. What's remarkable is how his legacy continues to grow posthumously. After his passing, tributes filled social media, concerts, and award shows. Quincy Jones remembered him as one of the most natural talents he ever worked with. Patty Austin described their duets as pure magic. Younger artists covered his songs on YouTube, keeping his memory alive for a generation that wasn't even born when Baby Come to Me or Just Once first climbed the charts. The rediscovery of his catalog by new listeners shows that true artistry doesn't expire. Even casual fans who may not know his full discography often remember one unforgettable moment: the way his part in The Secret Garden gave them chills, or the way his voice in We Are the World stood out among legends. Those moments, brief yet eternal, are proof that he belonged in the pantheon of greats. James Ingram's story is both inspiring and bittersweet. He gave the world timeless music, lived with integrity, and left behind a catalog that still stirs emotion decades later. And though he may not have always been celebrated with the same volume as Marvin, Luther, or Lionel, his influence is undeniable. In truth, James Ingram was never less than their equal. The industry may have underrated him, But history is correcting itself, one fan, one playlist, and one heartfelt memory at a time. Mini hook. Which begs the question, when we talk about the greatest male vocalists of all time, shouldn't James Ingram's name always be in that conversation? When we look back at James Ingram's journey, it feels like opening a time capsule filled with pure emotion. From the pews of an Akron church to the world's biggest stages, he carried the same gift, a voice that could speak directly to the soul. He wasn't about glitz or headlines, he was about honesty, love, and music that mattered. Think of that haunting plea in Just Once, the tenderness of 100 Ways, the timeless romance of Baby Come to Me, or the sensual power he brought to The Secret Garden. These songs weren't just hits, they were experiences. They've been etched into weddings, heartbreaks, family memories, and moments of quiet reflection. That's why, even after his passing, James's presence feels alive every time one of his songs begins to play. And yet, his story also carries a sense of injustice. Despite Grammy wins, Oscar nominations, and unforgettable collaborations, James Ingram's name is too often left out of the conversation when people list the greats. Perhaps it was his humility, his devotion to family, or simply the industry's blindness to subtle brilliance. Whatever the reason, the fact remains. James Ingram was underrated. But underrated does not mean unimportant. If anything, it makes his legacy even more powerful, because it lives on through the people who truly felt it. Fans continue to celebrate him, younger artists continue to study him, and his music continues to comfort, inspire, and move us. That is the definition of timeless. So here's the question. When we talk about the greatest voices in music history, the singers who could break your heart and heal it in the same breath, doesn't James Ingram deserve to be right there in the conversation? His name may not always shine the brightest on the marquee, but in the hearts of those who love real music, James Ingram is eternal.